Tim Ryan, thank you so much for doing this.
Great, Ann. Thanks for having me here. It's great to be here. Hello, everybody.
So I'd like to start off kind of at the beginning. When you started this job in July of 2016, something happened that kind of changed your approach to leadership at the company. What happened?
So on July 1, 2016, I had taken over as senior partner at PwC, and you're elected by your partners at PwC. And there's about a 3-month process leading up to getting elected. And like other candidates, I had a plan. And we had a plan to grow revenues. We were going to grow the number of customers we had. Our customers were going to be happier. It was a really, really good plan. Trust me, it was really good. The first week of July 2016, many of us may recall, we woke up on that Friday morning, my first Friday as senior partner, and we woke up to the shootings in Dallas. And what I realized coming to work that day was all of a sudden that plan didn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense. It was important, but what was really more important was what our people felt on that day. And I did what many CEOs did, not very courageous, not very extraordinary. I sent an email to our people, and I simply said, I know people are hurting, we don't have all the answers, but we're in it together. What happened was we got over 1,000 emails back, reach outs back, and it was summed up by one person who said it best. We're a fairly progressive organization, but when I came to work that Friday morning, the silence was deafening. And it hit me, here we are, we have every program in the world, we've invested over a decade in inclusion, and yet when the country was hurting most, our people came to work and we didn't know how to talk about it. And that was the beginning of a big change.
So what is the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion?
So what happened was we like many companies, after that Dallas event, we started talking about it. And on July 21st, 2016, we had our first day-long discussion on race. What we said is, we need to talk about this, building off of those emails we got from our people. And to be candid, that was risky at the time. If we think back, the country's emotions were raw. It was a very controversial, people felt different views around it. We took the step of saying, we're going to talk about it. And all across the country, we asked our people on July 21 to talk about how they felt about race. I had one Fortune 50 CEO say to me, before we did it, he said, that's going to blow up in your face, you're crazy. We ended up doing it, and one person summed it up best. They said, on that day, we shed more tears on that one day than we did our 160-year history at PwC. We learned about each other. Honestly, I thought I was done. I thought, okay, we can breathe, maybe get back to that plan. And one of our people said to me, Tim, what's your role as the CEO of a leading organization outside of PwC? And honestly, I was like, oh, I need a break. I need a break. But the more I thought about it, we do have a big role outside. And so I began to work with a couple of CEOs, in particular Ron Parker of the Executive Leadership Council, and also David Taylor of Procter & Gamble, and we began to talk about what is our role. And that led to the birth of the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. And this is this concept of partnerships. And what we did is we decided we were going to pull together CEOs and try to move inclusion further in the United States, not just on race, but inclusion across all underrepresented groups. And while we're all at different places in our organization, we realized there were 3 fundamental things that we should help all businesses do. Number 1, we should make our workplaces safe, truly safe, to talk around inclusion and how we feel about inclusion. The second thing we agreed is that unconscious bias training should be available to all workers across our country, no matter who you are, where you sit. And the third one was, we said we should share our best and not so best practices for the benefit of everybody. And today we have over 400 CEOs and over 450 best practices on our site. And that site is ceoaction.com. You can all pull it up. And you can now benefit from the best practice that everybody's have, so we can really get granular to make inclusion a reality.
So you mentioned there are 450 best practices. Do you have any favorites?
So I do. So the beauty of the site is it's cataloged by a number of different areas. So whether it be underrepresented groups, engaging men, engaging women, hiring practices, promotion practices, veterans. So some of my favorites are, so for example, at KeyBank, and you can pull this up, one of the things that KeyBank does is they show their recruiters before they recruit. They show them what biases they have in the recruiting process before they recruit, so they can make sure they don't have those biases come across. One of the things that we shared at PwC is we have invested millions in our unconscious bias training. We took out all the PwC language and lingo, and we shared our digital unconscious bias training available for everybody. So if you're a 10-person startup here in the Bay Area, you don't have the money to invest in unconscious bias training, you use ours. So I think there's a lot of favorites that you can look at, whether you want to see what Duke Energy does around promotion, KeyBank or Walmart, you can see our best practices, which is a tremendous way to raise the bar for everybody.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And so, as you go through this, do you ever encounter CEOs who say, this sounds soft, maybe this isn't what I want to be spending my time on, and what do you say to them?
So little context, so a big part of my job is meeting with CEOs every day, and over the course of a year, it might be 300 to 400 meetings a year while I interact with CEOs. I try, no matter what the purpose of the meeting is, whether we're talking about an audit or work we're doing with tax or consulting, I always try to bring inclusion into the discussion. I have not met a CEO who said it's unimportant. They all say it's important. When you drill down, what you find is many believe they're further than they are, and it's finding a way to respectfully push them along the journey and say, good, it's good that you're doing unconscious bias training, but then you can share best practices to gently, or sometimes not so gently, push them further along on the journey. So the good news is, it's at the forefront of almost every company we meet with. If I'm intellectually honest, it's your classic bell curve. You've got 20 or 30% that get it, they're leading from the front, they're driving, they're listening to you all, and others that are somewhere in the middle that need to be pushed. And frankly, I think that's our biggest opportunity, which is to give our CEOs the courage to push further and further and know that's going to be okay.
Can you talk a little bit about the transformation at PwC? How has your leadership team changed?
So one of the things that I would tell you is I'm blessed because I inherited a culture where inclusion was important. So we didn't have to start from ground zero. In fact, the two previous senior partners before me, so now a period of 12, 16 years, had been very steeped in inclusion, diversity, and so we inherited a culture that was clear that it was important. We had dozens of programs that across any element, we invested in training, and what I was able to do is take that and really be a beneficiary of that. So I was very lucky to have the fact that we had done a ton of succession planning, and so my leadership team is one of the most diverse in corporate America. That wasn't an accident. That's because we had over a decade of deliberate succession planning to give underrepresented people an opportunity to do it. And I took the opportunity as a new senior partner to leverage that succession planning and make it a reality. But to take full credit for that would be a mistake, because there was two previous people before me that did tremendous succession planning. And then we built off of that with an incredibly diverse team. We spend almost 100% of our time out with our people and our clients, sharing those lessons with our clients and our people to say you can make this a reality if you're deliberate about it.
Right. And when you think about succession planning, how does data and analytics factor into that? How do you think about it?
So one of the things that I worry about, and I'm paranoid about it, I worry that I lose touch, right? We're a big organization, 55,000 people. You can't be everywhere. And I think one of the biggest risks that we all have as CEOs is you unintentionally lose touch with reality. Said differently, you are a victim of what you're exposed to. And part of the challenge we all have is making sure we're exposed to our entire organization, not just where we get dragged into in those various pieces. And that's where you all come in. My words of encouragement to you, we make sure you help your CEOs, your executive teams, see their blind spots, see what they don't see. So a big part of what we try to do at PwC is make sure we're seeing the entire organization, and that's, again, why we're on the road. It's very deliberate. We're on the road 100% with our people and clients, so we see the different parts of our organization, and those data points are important. So we're driven by data, and we're incredibly data-rich, but then we complement that data with what I call qualitative data points. And I believe the job of a leader, my job, is to study data and then to listen to the data points out there. So many of you are CHROs. I'm looking to our human capital people to give me data points. Is it working? So last night, Michael referred to the dinner we were at last night. I had the privilege of sitting next to our human capital person who runs the western part of our country. He gave me 3 important data points that I didn't know. Things I thought up here were translating down, but they weren't quite making it the way we thought. Had I not been fortunate enough to sitting next to him, I would have only had the data, and I would have had the qualitative side. So don't ever underestimate your ability to make a difference in the minds of the CEO. Those qualitative data points, in many cases, are as strong as the actual, the quantitative data points.
What's an example of a piece of data that changed your mind?
So one of the things that we look at data around gender pay gap. We look at data around ratings gap, performance gaps. We look at data of our pipeline. One of the things that I'm keenly focused on right now is underrepresented groups in our pipeline. So in our business, as people progress throughout their careers and get closer to partner, we want to make sure we have a diverse group of partners. And we've done very well over the last several years, but we're not where we need to be. And so over the last 2 years, I've immersed myself in the data around people who are 3 to 6 years away from partner to make sure we're doing everything we can to get those people into the partnerships. And it started with, what's the data? And I can tell you today how many people in the underrepresented groups are in the partner pipeline, where their performance ratings are, where they're located. And that data starts, but that's not the end point. And we're very focused on that.
Right. So you're talking about pretty big changes at PwC. You know, as you go out to other companies, do you think that they overestimate the barriers to change?
So, great question. Go back to the point I said where I have this wonderful privilege, like many of my partners, of meeting with CEOs. Many of them would say that we want to do better, but we're not sure how to do better. I recently had a discussion with the CEO of a very large global insurance company that's headquartered here in the United States, and he had sought us out on the topic of diversity. And he said, Tim, you folks are doing a lot, and make no mistake about it, we're not where we want to be, but we're doing okay, and I'm proud of our people and what we're doing. He said, I think I'm doing the right things, but can you give me specifics? And we then went through 6 specifics, very specific things that we're doing. And he said, holy cow, we're not doing any of that. I thought I was doing well. He goes, I didn't even realize people were doing those types of things. And I'll give you one example. So one of the things that we often hear as part of succession planning is, how do you give people the right opportunity? In the professional services space, working on one's largest clients is important in career progression. So said differently, partners aspire to work on the largest clients. And we have 20 top 20 clients. 5 years ago, we had 20 men, 20 white men, doing our 20 top 20 clients. Not proud of that, but that's what it was. We set a goal to get 6 in 5 years done by underrepresented groups. Now, you may say that doesn't sound terribly ambitious, but if you're in professional services, what you know is you have to work with the client. You don't make that decision by yourself. So we then embarked at the most senior levels of our firm, the CEO before me and me, working with our clients and sitting down and saying, we believe this person has all the skills, and we're putting our name to it. Today, we're at 9. 9 out of our top 20 are done by our underrepresented groups. But that specific didn't happen unless we were willing to roll up our sleeves and sit down client by client and put our personal name next to incredibly talented professionals. Sharing that story with the CEO around how we did that, that really helped him on his journey. I'm finding that more and more CEOs are willing to hear the specifics. And by the way, I learned too, right? It's not just a one-way, but in that case, he benefited from those 5 or 6 specific best practices, and then he now has ideas on how to execute it better.
That is really incredible. Can you share any of those specifics?
Yeah, so that was one, right, that we did. I'll give you another one. So at PwC, one of our people represented this. So when we said for unconscious bias training, we had a long debate as to whether you make that a requirement or whether we try to inspire people to take it. Now, as many of you know, there's a lot of requirements in life. There's legal requirements, in our business, independence requirements. And if you have a requirement, it tends to be more, I've got to check the box. So we at first said, well, diversity is important. We're going to have unconscious bias and we're going to make it required for everybody. That's what we're going to do. The more we talked to our people, they said, don't make it required. And one of our persons came up with a really innovative idea. In our business, people get promoted generally every 3 years. So you join the firm and you instantly begin to lead people. We tied unconscious bias training to hiring and promotion. So every new hire, as part of your leadership journey, you take unconscious bias training. When you get promoted in 2 to 3 years, you take the next level. When you get promoted in another 4 years, you take the next level. So we tied it to your leadership development in your journey, which is more getting at the heart than it is the compliance exercise. As we sit here today, we're at roughly 35,000 of our 55,000 people have taken it because it's part of their leadership journey, as opposed to a check-the-box compliance requirement you do at 6 o'clock at night.
Totally voluntarily.
Yes.
Most people took it.
But it's tied to the promotion requirement. That's a specific that we're sharing with people. That's worked well for us. But it took us a while to get there.
Right. As a general rule, as a leader trying to change a culture, how do you think about the carrot versus the stick?
Oh, all the time. Like if you were in, so our leadership team is 19, and I'm incredibly proud of the 19 people on the leadership team because we serve by what I'll say servant leadership. We serve at the pleasure of our people and our partners. And we often struggle with how much do we inspire and how much do we tell. So true story, and you'll all laugh, and somewhere out there, as there's members of my leadership team, you're going to say, oh my God, is he going to tell the story? We view our job as leaders to be retailers, Said differently, if someone isn't buying their products, and so you can see them wearing jeans, we changed our dress code 2 years ago to jeans. And if a retailer is not selling their jeans, they can't yell at the customer. Like, that's not a good strategy if you're in retail to yell at the customer. So what you try to do is you figure out, why did people not buy your jeans? Were they too tight, too skinny, too short, wrong material? So we talk about it is, if we're proposing new changes in the organization and people aren't doing it, it's not our people's fault, it's our fault. Like, we're not retailing the change. And so we talk about how do we make it so people want to buy in and want to do it. Now, to be clear, if you're in leadership roles, that's hard. Like, that raises the bar on leadership. We have to do a good job at retailing change in our organization, which is way more carrot than it is stick. And I'll give you an example of something we did recently. So we are heavily focused right now on 3 key things at the firm. Digital upskilling of all 55,000 of our people, because our people told us they're worried about their ongoing relevancy. And we've invested heavy in digital upskilling of our people. People have also told us that be well, work well. Physical and mental well-being, with all the demands in the world, is a skill they want us to help invest in. And they also told us that they want the ability to lead on some of society's biggest issues, like diversity, inclusion, education, climate. And we call that skills for society. We've invested heavily in development in each of those 3 areas. We then had the question of, do you tell people to do it, and it's for their own good? And what we did is, instead, the carrot we put in place, we set some very minimal baseline requirements, like a low hurdle, and we said if everybody hits it, we're going to shut the firm down on July 4th week. So instead of, and by the way, that'll cost us $70 million, to be clear. That's the cost of shutting the firm down for a week. And what we said is, we said if everybody buys in just a little on digital fitness, physical and mental well-being, build well, work well, and skills to society, what we will do is everybody gets the week off at the same time. That's a carrot. That's a lot. Carrots cost money, but we think it's the right thing to do to inspire change on things that our people told us are most important.
Right. And so when you did change the dress code and when you did do more jeans, that was kind of a radical step. Can you talk about that? Did you meet with resistance?
So it certainly was radical in New York. It wasn't radical here, but in New York. So I can say this because I work in New York. So I announced this at a New York partners meeting, and picture like being on stage like this, but it's not a forward-thinking audience like this. It's the New York partners. They're all sitting there like this in their suits, and I announced we're going to jeans, and they're like rolling their eyes. So there was resistance, but it's important to explain why we did that in all seriousness. The reason we did it is because we hire some of the most intelligent, bright people in the world. And it was a symbolic attempt to say, we trust you. We trust you to do the right thing, and we're not going to go to business if someone has ripped jeans or open sandals. It's not going to happen. We don't have a client that gets mad. We don't have a coworker that gets mad, but we're not going to business. And what we are really trying to do out of the gate is symbolically say, we trust you to take care of one another. We trust you to do the right thing for each other on the ground, because that's where decisions happen, and we trust you to do the right thing by our clients on the ground. And it was a beginning of what I call implementing trust-based leadership. But it was met with resistance. I think I mentioned this when we were talking last night. So my human capital folks who are out there in the audience, and you folks are awesome, but when we first came out with the email to announce this, you all tried to edit it 5 times. Like, well, it can only be this kind of jeans with this kind of shirt. Can't be ripped jeans, can't be open sandals. And finally I said, no, we're missing the point. Like, we have to trust our people to do the right thing. And so that's been this journey of trust-based leadership.
How has that helped with recruiting?
One of the things that's important is the CEOs that we speak with, and we do an annual CEO survey, one of the top 5 things that's on CEOs' minds is winning the war for talent. to be clear. Like, we are in a talent war, and for the rest of our careers, we're going to be in a talent war. So one of the great things about Great Place to Work is it pushes the bar to make sure we're all making ourselves attractive. Genes by itself doesn't win the war for talent. A holistic view around talent development, having a great place to work where you're trusting and building and investing in your people, that wins the war for talent. And I spend 5 days a year I'll spend on campus, like many of our leaders, and we recruit from about 250 schools, and we bring in about 9,000 college graduates off campus each year and about another 2,000 experienced hires. The questions they ask us, it's not about, hey, what's PwC's growth rate? Like, what's our product offering? Like, they don't ask us that. What they ask us is, what do we stand for? Like, what are you doing to help me in my career? And the fact that we have deliberately invested in our purpose of building trust and solving important problems, the fact that we're helping our people and not leaving them behind on digital fitness, the fact that we have a culture of be well, work well, and the fact that we're investing in skills in society, that's what they want to hear. And that's what we're doing. And honestly, I don't know how anybody wins the war for talent if you're not doing that.
Right. So you're talking a lot about big changes at the organization. Right. There's got to be some internal pushback from the old guard. How do you deal with that?
So I think one of the things that we often hear, and both at PwC and at our clients, is you'll often meet with the CEO and you'll say, I know what I want to do. My people know what I want to do. It's the middle. It's the middle of my organization. And that's true sometimes, but here's the challenge for me and for other leaders. And a quick story. About 7 or 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to be at a small table with former President Clinton. And he said, I'm going to tell you the biggest mistake I made in the White House. And of course, we're all like, what's he going to tell us? And what he told us was, he said, I often assumed everybody knew why I was doing things. And he said, I often brushed across the why. And so we do run into resistance, but this goes to the retail philosophy. It does no good if I get mad at the middle or any other CEO gets mad at the middle. We have to look in the mirror and say, have we really spent the time explaining to them, A, why we're doing it, and here's the important point, why it's going to be okay for them. Why it's going to be okay for them. Because the reality is around inclusion, one of the biggest things that the middle worries about is what does it mean to them. And so what we've learned is maybe to slow down a bit and invest more in explaining why we're doing this, why digital fitness is so important, why inclusion is so important, what it means to their career advancement opportunities. And that's what we mean by that first commitment on a CEO action for diversity and inclusion, having the true safe conversations. It's one thing to say it's the right thing to do, which it is. It's one thing to say it's a business imperative, which it is. It's one thing to say if we don't do it, we'll have regulation that does it for it, which I believe. But it's more important to say, here's why you're going to be okay as a white man middle manager, and here's why it's best for everybody. And those are the conversations we're having at PwC, and they're not easy, to be clear.
What do those conversations look like? Do you have to pull people aside? Do you do bigger meetings?
Both. So we will do both. So at a personal level, so I grew up in the financial services space at PwC. I will often meet with people that I grew up with who have said to me, Tim, I get it. We love the agenda that you're pushing, that you and the team are driving. It makes sense to me. But what does it mean to me? I'll often be with 4 or 5 at a time, people that I grew up with, and they'll say, help me understand how I think about it, how I can be better. But God, I wanted to be in one of those top 20 clients. I've worked my whole career. And we're having very candid conversations. Literally 2 days ago, I agreed to meet next time in New York on March 19th with one of our partners who just lost a race to be one of those top 20 guys. I mean, this is real. And he's a great partner, but he didn't get it. And now we're going to talk about what it means to him. And if you're not willing to invest that time as a senior leader, your aspirations of a truly inclusive organization aren't going to happen, because that hallway talk won't stop. So I'll meet with him like I do very often. And then we'll do it in larger groups as well.
Does growth factor into this as well?
Great question. The piece of advice for everybody. If your organization isn't growing, over the long term, it's going to be hard to be truly inclusive. And just like we were talking earlier, sometimes keeping things simple is really important. Basic business logic would tell you if an organization is stagnant, not growing, it's going to be very hard to be inclusive, because in the middle, people are going to be fighting for slots, too few slots. So growth is really important. One of the things that I didn't learn in the classroom when I went to college, but I learned it in life. We often, as leaders, will talk about, hey, the growth rate is X. That's important, but what's really important is explain why the growth rate is so important. Because when an organization is growing, you create opportunities for everybody. Good news is we're growing, so we don't talk about our top 20 clients anymore. We talk about our top 50 clients because we're growing. When you're growing, you can invest in your people. So growth is critical, in my view, to development of a great workforce. Growth is critical to inclusion, and so it is a big part of what we talk about. So we have 6 children, and if they would ever listen to me, which is a big if, I would tell them, make sure you go to an organization not only has the right culture, but that's growing, because that's where you need the opportunities to grow.
So this guy might have another good job waiting for him.
Without a doubt. And that's part of my job, which is not only celebrate the person who got the job, which we do, by the way. In our communications, we often talk about the people who go into these roles because we want to make sure we celebrate that, but it's equally celebrating that we help him get into the right role as well.
Right. And so going forward, you know, what are the lessons that you take away from something that maybe you tried, a risk that you took that did not go over well?
So many of us have, we only have 4 minutes, so I could take a long time. No, I have so many mistakes we've made, which we have. We at times have shot for the fences, like the big transformational change, and because most of us are ambitious and we like our hearts are in the right place, we want big change. And what we've realized is this is a series of small steps. Now, don't interpret small steps for lack of courage and an excuse to drag it out over a longer period of time. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking, we've come to the realization that deliberate small steps matter in a big way. And also, you need to be willing on each of those small steps to win the small battle. So I'll give you an example. So we had launched, one of the specifics that we had put in place is we said every senior leader who wanted to get onto what we call our ELT, our extended leadership team, which is roughly the top 150 partners in the firm. We said big change, big bold change. In order to be on the ELT, you need to have a distinctive diversity experience. I mean, you had to have done something meaningful to show that you're a leader and that you get it and you can inspire and drive change in an organization. Right idea. That was a little bit swinging for the fences. What we didn't do is we weren't willing at first, when somebody said I had it, but it wasn't really substantive, we didn't really sit down and coach them as to why it wasn't substantive. So we announced this big goal that we were going to have every leader being on the LT to have a DDE, a distinctive diversity experience. But what we realized is we didn't have, I call it the plumbing, we didn't have the protocol in place to respectfully say, you know what, Tim, you say you had a distinctive diversity, that's really not it. Like, giving a talk is not leadership. And so it was exhausting, but we had to kind of pull back a bit and say, we need to then mentor people, say, that's not the bar we were looking for down here, it was up here. That means you got to be willing to have one-on-one conversations. And so we realize it's baby steps, but those baby steps are exhausting, but they're really important.
So I want to take a step back and take a broader look at the world and politics and the economy and business. There's a lot of change happening. It can feel chaotic, almost random. Do you see any larger forces guiding what we're seeing right now?
So I've been privileged to see the world through our firm. I've been to 57 countries. There's a couple of programs around leadership immersion that I've invested in, and I consider myself to be truly privileged to have seen many different elements of the world. I learned you never say all or none, so I'm not going to say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot. It is pretty clear to me that the rest of our working careers, we are going to be living in a world of protectionism. Why do I say that? Our world is short financial resources for roads, bridges, infrastructure, Social Security, elderly, education, defense. We're also in a world where we're short natural resources. We have 2 billion people who are water disadvantaged across our world, including in parts of California. We're short food in different parts of the world. Those two things aren't going away. We also live in a world that's fully transparent through social media, so we know who has what and who doesn't have what. That basic concept of shortage of financial resources, shortage of natural resources, combined with the fact that we're in a fully transparent world, that raises the bar on leadership more than we've ever seen before. A traditional leader just had to worry about your employees, your customers, and your investors. Now a leader has to worry about those three, and they also have to worry about society. And leaders have to lean in and be part of solving those societal issues because they're not going away. And a big part of our role is to lean in. It's why people like Larry Fink or Bill McNabb of Vanguard are saying a big part of what leaders have to do is lean into societal issues, because if you don't, you won't win the war for talent, you won't be relevant to your customers, and you won't be living up to your responsibility for society. I think those forces are going to be with us. That's not a, whatever your politics are, that's not a political issue. Those are societal issues that aren't going away. And the good news is, the people who are joining our organizations, they're dying to help solve those issues. Our job is just get out of the way and let them do it.
I think that's a great note to end on.
Okay.
Tim Ryan, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wonderful.